Thank you for stopping by the Hoarding Solution podcast. I'm really happy today to be talking with Richard Kaufman, who is the Comeback Coach and hosts the Vertical Momentum podcast. And we have some other things in common, like being veterans and both survivors of hoarding parents who are dealing with that whole aspect right now. So I'm very happy to be here talking with Richard, and welcome.
Tammy Moses, my sister from another mister. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be here and glad to see, at least in our neck of the woods, we do have some sun today.
Yep, it was 75 degrees by my house today. I actually got out, went for a walk, listened to some stuff on some books on my headphones as I'm walking. So I'm in a great mood today. I'm motivated to be here.
Well, I'm really happy we could make this work. And I just, we were talking before about around mental health and how important that is for the caregiver to maintain. And I think that that is a huge missing piece often of the conversation when we are in a caregiving role, how valuable it is to remember that we matter too. And I'm wondering if you have how you maintain your positive outlook when you're dealing with your mom or some of the situations surrounding her. How do you maintain your positive space around you when you're going through that?
I throw shit and I yell a lot. But no, I have my bad days and I have my good days. But one thing that when I do go see my mom, I usually try to see her twice a week. I know that when I walk out of there, I'm free. Um, I can go out, I can go grab a burger, I can go grab a fries, I can take my kids out, I can go to the movies, and knowing that the only way she's leaving that place is in a body bag, it kind of it reminds me of this thinking, no matter what you're going through, just be grateful that for what you have because we all might end up that way. So I just try to live in a lot of gratitude that I'm not living that way at this moment.
Right. Like the aging population often ends up in some place because their care can't be maintained. And or I think it's an unfair expectation that the only way to provide for a loved one is that you have to do the hands-on everything. And while that might work for some people, I think we have to really consider what the other alternatives are, especially if that someone was harmful to us or has a hoarding situation or they're a huge fall risk they're unsafe in their space. Like, we have to consider that that is a way for them to have a better quality of life and for us to have some darn freedom. Because if you're in that position where you're constantly monitoring or being on, that's exhausting work for you.
Yeah. So, for me, my abuser is my mother. So for me, it's hard to try to be kind. But something, I had you on my show last week, and
Mm-hmm.
something we talked about, it's been resonating in my mind that I lived across the street from my mother for 10 years and I saw her maybe twice a year. And
Wow.
now, since she got sick and my dad died, I moved her up here and I'm getting mad at myself that I'm not seeing her more than twice a week. And I'm like, that's insanity. I'm like, if she was, even my wife said, if she was still healthy and living in South Carolina, I'd only see her 2 or 3 times a year. So I'm stressing myself out because I'm not getting there as much as I think I should be. And like you told me, give yourself some grace. When you get there, enjoy being there. But if you can't get there, you can't get there. Don't wrap yourself around the axle too much about it. And I think a lot of us do that. We're like, I need to do more, I need to do more. And all you can do is all you can do, and all you can do is enough. You know what I mean?
And you have other obligations, right? You have family, you have spouse and kids and a life of your own, hopefully, or you are maybe able to get back to it after being mired in something like that. But you're right, we beat ourselves up because we feel like we should be doing more. But I mean, I lived 3 hours away before. Like I might see my parents once a month, maybe, or maybe every couple months, depending on my work schedule and whatever. And so, but I do think that guilt is kind of something that's built into us. Like we should be doing more, right? It's our parent. They brought us into this world, that type of thing. But, you know, I was thinking about this yesterday. They were adults first, right? And they didn't get their stuff figured out. So now it's spilling onto us and we have to figure it out. And it's not fair to our families and our new nuclear family that we've created to constantly be pulled into that mess, even though that's kind of how it works. I just think we have to take a step back and say, I can personally only handle once this week. Mentally, I can only handle this situation one time this week. And I'm learning to detach from largely the emotional detachment from some of it because let's face it, they just don't care about themselves as much as we care about them sometimes. And we can't keep putting ourselves down or shoulding on ourselves all the time because of their situation. And frankly, you've probably done the most loving thing you could possibly do, which is have her uh, in a place where she's safe and you are free when you walk out that door. And I'm looking at similar scenarios myself with a situation, and it's like, this is not sustainable. This is not going to work. And we have to step in and parent them. And that's hard too. Like, it's hard to step in and say, hey, that's not going to happen anymore. And we're going to do it this way now. And not really discussing it. To get to the point where there's no point, you know, with someone who doesn't understand you or is starting down a dementia path. You can have that conversation 10 times and they aren't going to remember tomorrow, or they might distort it and say things to people that aren't true. So you get to the point where you have to really navigate it from a what's safe for me perspective.
Yeah, and like my mother's starting down a dementia path, like you said, she doesn't know the difference if we're paying $60 a month or $6,000 a month. It doesn't compute.
Right.
So I got to the point where I'm just like, okay, you're right. You're for a while. Every time I go, she would disrespect my father, and
Mm.
my father dedicated 40 years of his life taking care of her. And I said, if you disrespect him, I'm not coming. I will not be. I'm telling you that. If you want to be by yourself, you want to be lonely, that's fine. But there has to be parameters. You're not going to disrespect me and you're not going to disrespect my father. And I think no matter if you have Alzheimer's or not, once you realize, oh shit, they're not coming. I'm not getting the candy. I'm not getting the ding dongs and the ring dings. You kind of they kind of learn their role that hey, there's certain things, there's certain boundaries that you have to set. You're not going to disrespect me or my father. So if you don't want me to come, that's fine. I'll go to the beach. You know what I mean? And I think we have to set boundaries and not be abused because just because you're my parents don't mean you can abuse me. You know what I mean?
Right. And you have to have some kind of limitation on what you're going to put up with. Because not only is that important for you, you're setting an example if you have kids that are seeing you or, around and involved. Like you're setting an example for what's tolerated. And I've had to have that same conversation and say, you know what, Mom, I am not going to stand here and listen to this. And if you keep on, I'm walking away. Let me tell you, the first time I had to walk away was really hard because it feels like I'm being disrespectful to that person. But in reality, I'm walking away because they were being disrespectful and rude and obnoxious. And I understand as things progress on some of these journeys that they do lose their ability to know what they're saying or maybe the impact of what they're saying. And I understand that. But you can also see when someone's not quite at that point and they're doing things or saying things specifically that are hurtful and mean. And often I have seen it, they're saying it because they know it bugs you and they know that it's a trigger for you. And I've heard it often said that the reason they can trigger you is because they installed the trigger. And so I see that, where we all have things we've dealt with in our past, right? But our parents probably know about the majority of them and they can bring it up in a heartbeat. And you're like, why are we even talking about that? Like, I don't really want to discuss my ex-husband. Like, there's a reason that there's an X in front of that word. There's painful things that we don't necessarily want to live through every day, but some of these folks figure out what those buttons are and push them regularly. So it comes back to, what am I going to tolerate? And if you're going to be disrespectful to me, I'm walking out this door and I'll see you next week. If I come and and I do think that often it's that follow through that's really hard. Like, you set that boundary and then it's like, well, do I just leave because I said I would? Yeah, sometimes that's what it is. You have to leave because you need them to know that this is something that is your non-negotiable and that you will walk away from that conversation. And at the same time, like you mentioned, the candy and the things like that, you can have Amazon Prime just drop it off. Like, you don't have to personally be the one that takes it. And I've seen people kind of walk that path too, because you want them to have whatever, but you don't want to be engaged. Like, you just can't deal with it this week. Or maybe you've had additional things. Maybe you've had to deal with an attorney or admissions or Medicaid or Medicare or whatever. Like, there's a lot of silent stuff that you do behind the scenes for these people that is often unrecognized and unappreciated. And so adding 2 more hours to your week to go deal with them on top of it can be really exhausting work. And I did a couple things last week. And then at the end of my hour, I was like, that's it. That's all you get today. I was just talking to my paper saying, that's it. Like, I've made this call. I got this information. That's all I can handle today for this situation. And even that, I think you have to know what your limit and your boundaries are as far as how much time can you devote to it, with your other obligations that you have.
Well, like my mother, with my mother, and my dad died Valentine's Day a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This has been ongoing 2.5 years
Right.
now, and I put my business on hold for 2.5 years now, and now I'm finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But I gave up everything. I would be in Myrtle Beach 3 out of 4 weeks out of the
Mm-hmm.
month in the dark with no internet. So my mental health was fucked for about 2 years. And then, it's just coming to me now when my mother says, well, I'm your mother. And I say, okay, you chose to have sex. Congratulations. If you had the fun and now I'm the one that's got to pay for it. I'm like, no, it's not, even like in the military, we're taught respect is earned. It's not given. Just because you gave birth to me, that doesn't mean that, I got 3 kids, one of them is my own. I have 2 stepchildren, which I don't like using the word stepchildren, but I'm a father,
Right.
but anybody could be a father. It takes a real man to be a daddy or a mommy. So just don't come out with me that stuff to say, oh, well, I'm your mother. I think that's when we need to start saying, okay, you're my mother, and what? I'm your son. Okay. Now we know who we are. Okay. Let's
Right.
finish playing the game. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, we need to start thinking about that. We're like, okay, you know, you're my mother, but like my father, my mother, we told them 20 years ago, you need to get life insurance. You need to get a long-term health plan. And they're like, God's going to take care of it. Well, 20 years later, I'm God in this situation. So because you didn't take care of what we told you to take care of, now I got to pay the price? Not going to happen.
And that's a promotion that you probably didn't put in for. Most of us don't want to be, well,
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself. I don't want to be in charge of the universe. Like, I am just fine with someone else, some being in charge of things. But I kind of, and I don't know that it's biblical, but I kind of feel like God helps those that helps themselves. And he gives you free will, right? Which means you still have some kind of responsibility, accountability, choice for whatever it is. And like, for example, I know my mom lived through lots and lots of trauma starting at a very young age. And so I understand that on a human level. I went and took psychology courses. Like, I understand that that is her reality. But I also understand that I had my own trauma and baloney and things to work through. And I made a conscious decision to do that so that I would be a functioning human being. And that's my shout out for finding a good therapist, because there are good other options, which I could speak about later, but that have helped me immensely. But the starting point was talking to someone about all the things and working through that. And honestly, I probably should have bought stock in Kleenex at that time, because I went through a lot of that. And so I feel like even now in our generation, and I think we're talking more about mental health, we have more options to discuss it and address it. And I know people in their 70s, 80s, that wasn't as the norm back then. So I understand it in that capacity as well. But I also see other people who've survived a lot of these things, and they made choices as well to look at their own issues and address them and manage them so that they aren't impacting their children in the same way, so that they are creating a legacy of love and wanting to come home, instead of I'm going to run away because I can't stand you or the way you treat me, more so. Which, this is maybe just totally an aside, but when I hear a kid ran away, I'm like, well, what were they running away from? And we're in a big hurry to get them home, but what were they running away from? Like, are they not getting fed? Do they not have clean clothes? Is their parent an alcoholic? Is it drug use? Is there hoarding? Like, is there rodents crawling on them in their bed at night? Like, what made that kid run away? And I don't see us asking that. Now, granted, sometimes kids are running away because they just didn't like that you took their phone away. But there's other times when there's real extremes as to what's going on in their life. And I don't feel like we maybe ask that question enough, because we're in a big hurry to reunite the family, which is sometimes the right thing. But I don't know that we are assessing it enough when we see something like that. And even with our elderly folks, like, we can call all the different
Well,
entities,
let's talk about
you
the
know.
hoarding issue. The hoarding issue.
So
Yeah.
what?
So let's talk about the hoarding aspect of this,
Mm-hmm.
because my mother, for instance, my mother, when we talked to her 10, 20 years ago, why don't you get life insurance? Why don't you get long term? I don't have any money. That was the reason. When
Mm-hmm.
my dad died, I pulled 32 bags of garbage
Mm,
out of my mother's house. There was a $50,000 motorhome that we had to give away for free. Her car
mm,
we had to give away for free because it was all junked.
mm,
So, So a lot of it is, we think about, okay, like in my situations, my mother was so poor to the family thought that until they started saying, wait a minute, he just pulled out 32 bags of garbage. That's where all the money went. The money went to the motorhome. The money went to the cars that were all junked. So I think a lot of us as kids, we've got to start saying, hey, Ma, I really don't think you need a motorhome and you're not going anywhere. And I think that's some of the hard stuff, especially about hoarding and mental health that, we have to think as parents. I'm thinking I'm 55 now. I'm looking around my house and I'm going, I got way too much shit. I'm like, I need to because they're going to throw my, let me just start getting rid of some shit so they don't have to do all this work.
And I wish more parents thought that way. Like, hey, my kids aren't going to want this stuff. And they live in a small apartment, or they have their own kids, their own stuff. Like, and it's amazing to me how many older folks get really upset when their kids don't want their crap. And it's just a different mindset. It's a different era. I recently inherited some furniture, which I don't know that I needed that furniture, but there was like this emotional connection to my aunt that passed. And so now it kind of makes me smile to see that the rocking chair that she gave me. But I was also selective about it. And when we were reviewing it, I was like, well, let's roll out this rug. And I was like, wait a minute. Let's look at it and decide if we want it in this space. Let's not just, well, we have it, so let's cram it in here. And let's be mindful of what we're bringing in here. And so I had to rearrange furniture and do all this stuff to make it work, but I still didn't bring in a lot of the unnecessary things. I'm like, we have a different space for that. But I look around some of the things I have too, and I'm like, at some point, no one's going to want this stuff, and kids, relatives, cousins, like they're going to be like, what are we going to do with it? And I think that, like, my grandma passed away. This was probably about 15 years ago now, but she was the same thing. I don't have money. I can't afford it. I was sending her stamps and envelopes because she was telling me that she didn't have the money to buy stamps, which turned out to be inaccurate because when her hoard was cleared out, they found like 20 grand worth of uncashed Social Security checks tucked in different places. And so she was living very frugally, I guess we'll say, but she didn't have to eat, food that wasn't good for her. She didn't have to eat leftovers that had been in the fridge too long. Like, she had other choices, but acted like she didn't, basically. And I'm seeing that a lot with folks that have hoarding issues. They're hoarding their money, they're hoarding their stuff, they're buying things they don't need. And then they're turning around saying, well, I don't have the money. I'm broke. I'm poor. I can't move to an apartment. I don't have the income, which comes back to what you were saying. They don't understand often the difference between $7, $7,000, or $70,000. So could be why they got a $50,000 motorhome, because they're not realizing the different values that are actually there. And it's so frustrating when you have a conversation and say, hey, this is what we think needs to happen, and they won't listen to you. Alternatively, someone else might say the same thing to them and they're like, oh, this is the greatest idea ever. And you're like, yeah, okay, we've been talking about this for 20 years. And I understand they don't want us to parent them, but if you sign that paper that says I'm going to have to parent you legally, then they're already signing up for it. That you're already being promoted to this position that you maybe didn't want in the first place.
Yep, I agree.
So when you're dealing with all of this stuff, like my boyfriend Ron and we are partners. We are dealing with a person that hoards. We're dealing with clearing the property. We took it on voluntarily, but just this morning, I'm like, yeah, we're doing this, but I'm like, but Jesus. But then I realized that's more like a prayer than anything. Like, if it wasn't for him, there's no way I could breathe some days and get through some of these things. But so how do you manage your relationship with your uh, how do you reconnect, like you've had a tough day, you've had to deal with whatever, and now you're there with your wife going, I really want to connect with you, but how am I going to do that well? Do you have any tips or tricks for like releasing your burden for the moment?
Well, honestly, and you know my wife, you know my bride, my best
Hmm.
friend.
She's a
And
beautiful, beautiful lady inside and out.
she's amazing. She hates my mother because she knows how abused I was. So she'll help me out with paperwork and stuff like that. But she's like, it's on you. Whatever, I'll help you with the paperwork. I'll help you with this, but I'm not going to see her. I'm not going to do anything for her. And I respect that because she knows I was abused. That's why my wife won't even buy my first book because if she buys that book, she's going to go nuclear. But there's sometimes, and I almost took myself out. I think about 3 months ago.
Mm,
The only reason I didn't because I got in bed with my wife. I'm breaking down and I'm crying and I'm like, I just need you to hold me. I don't need you to say nothing. I just need you to hold me and let me know everything's all right. So
hmm.
for me, a lot of it is being vulnerable to being, honey, I'm having a bad day. And because we both work from home, so she sees me all day long and she can't wait for this new studio to be built. But there's some times where even like for me, we went to Vegas. We're going back to Vegas, but we went to Vegas. And if anybody ever asked me what the best thing we did in Vegas, for me, it was when we went on the gondola ride.
Mm,
Just holding my wife's hand, listening to the Italian singer sing to us. I didn't care about the glitz, the glamour, but just spending those moments with her. So
right,
sometimes we'll just sit on the couch. She'll have her iPad playing her game. I'll have my phone or I'll be watching sports. We're not saying anything, but we're still together. So
right,
I think sometimes you have to say, you got to be vulnerable and say, I'm having a bad day. Just like, your boyfriend, there's some days he's not feeling well.
right,
But if he's acting all high and mighty and like Mighty Joe Young, you know, but that he's not feeling good. So if he just says, "Hun, today you want to go to the market, I'm not feeling it today," then you can understand. But if you don't know the problem, you can't help but fix the solution. So I think vulnerability has got to be key.
and I think that I know it's something I struggle with, being vulnerable to the point of like, look, this isn't happening today, or I can't, like I've managed all I can for the moment, but I also feel if I said it, it would be accepted, right? And I think that's part of the fear of being vulnerable is, can I be vulnerable with you? And I think it's so valuable when we do have someone who can just say, okay, like I hear you and I'm just going to hold you. I'm just going to hold your hand. I'm just going to enjoy this moment and be present. But I also get like sometimes we're listening to something and I could care less about whatever's on TV. So I'm in my phone or my computer or reading or something. But there is something to be said for being just present together as well and not necessarily hashing it all out. Sometimes you don't need that. Sometimes I don't want to talk about it again
Oh,
because I've already talked about it 5 times.
and like yesterday I did a post, and it was about how my wife says that there's always a last time for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So like a couple years ago, I went to go kiss my daughter, bring her up to bed, read to her. She's like, ah, she's like, I'm a big girl now. I don't need you to tuck me in anymore. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, I'm a big girl, daddy. But that was the last time.
Right.
If
I
I would have
remember
known
you
the time
talking about that.
before, if I would have known the time before, I would have soaked it in a lot more than. So everything has a last time. You're going to be with your grandmother or somebody one last time sometime.
Hmm.
So enjoy the moments and be in the moment. Because I always say that your family would appreciate your presence more than your presence. You know what I mean?
Right. And things are just things, right? You don't get your time back. You don't get that last moment back. Like there is a final time. I mean, I saw my aunt, probably about for the last time about 6 weeks, I think, before she actually was on hospice and passed away. And at that point, I'm not sure she knew who I was actually, but but energetically, I think there was a recognition of who we are to each other. And I'm very grateful I had that final time and was able to share a little of her history with her, the primary person responsible for her care at that point. And I'm very grateful I had that last moment, And sure, I'm grateful for some of the other things I received from her, but it's really that time that I spent, and even prior to that, where I visited a few times, it's those moments of laughing and talking and connecting that really warm my heart and make me smile now versus, oh, I got a few things that granted, they were important for her to say that I should have them, but um, it that's not what I think about most of the time. I think about the fact that we got a couple pictures and she met my cat, and like there's these kind of like emotional touch points along the way that matter far more to me. Um, Plus connecting with other relatives who loved her and she loved, like there's an important aspect, I think, even when someone passes away, that it allows you to draw other people to you, or the event draws it and you find out more about who people really are, I think, when you're dealing with some kind of transition, whether it's death or selling a home or a nursing facility or whatever it is. Like going in the military, my aunt was actually very taken aback that I went in the Navy as a teenager, but she was also one of the very supportive people once I made that decision. So I don't I don't know if we realize the value of the moment until it's over. And like you're saying, there's going to be a last time, right? Like we moved into our new house and there was a last night that I slept in a camper, thank God. Because we've been doing this process for a while. But there is always that last time. The last time I saw my dad, the last time I saw my brother, like there is just an awareness I think we need to have about those situations. And I just, tomorrow would be my dad's like 84th birthday, I guess. And so it's like there's something about September that's always been new to change to me. And I'd like to think that the moments I spent with him mattered to him, and I know they did. And Ron will often tell me, hey, you mattered to him. He cared about you. He was happy to see you when you would visit him. And again, it was the same thing. I couldn't get to see him at the nursing facility as often as I probably would have if I lived closer, but I still was able to go there and see him and visit. But anyway, I guess I'm getting off on a tangent there, but we never, it's like water, right? Down a river. It'll never pass the same way again. So right now is your moment, when you are having time with your family, when you're having time with your loved ones. I think it can be very important to put down the phone, put it down and just be unplugged. And some days I'm good about that, other days I'm not. But um
Well, like we went on a cruise to the Bahamas, and there
mhm.
was no internet for 8 days. And she booked another cruise for November for 8 days on the same cruise. So for the first day, I was like, "Argh!" But then after that, I was like, okay, it's all good. Now I can actually enjoy the ocean. I can actually enjoy the kids. I can actually enjoy the virgin pina coladas. I can actually be in the moment because I don't have to worry about my phone. I would just let my phone plugged in their other room. I mean, I would make
Yep.
videos for podcasts and all that, but other than that, I was like, I just want to enjoy it. I want to be able to enjoy. So now, even like I was working out in my studio a little while ago, there was no music. It was just quiet, and I'm hearing crickets, and I'm like, this is awesome. Even if it's 5 minutes, just peace and not being plugged. It helps a lot with your mental health. This is killing a lot of people. This phone,
Mhm.
this computers are isolating people and killing a lot of people because they're not talking like me and you are and just saying, hey, and there's many times I've messaged you and you've messaged me like, "Hey, I'm having a rough day," and
Mhm.
you'll be like, "It's okay. It's everything's gonna be all right. We're going through the same shit."
Yeah.
So I think that you need to be vulnerable and you need to have like for me, it's you, it's Dudek, it's Curry, it's Lido. There's certain people that are my amigos that I know. Listen, if I'm struggling, I just say, "Hey, struggling. Can we hop on a call?" And then we do it all the time. But I think we have to be vulnerable to say, I'm having a bad day, guys. And I think
Mhm.
if we can do that, that number 22 will go down a lot if we're just vulnerable and be able to pick up the phone and call somebody or answer the phone when somebody's calling.
Mhm. And it's very isolating, depending on where you're at or what you're dealing with. If you don't know anyone who's going through anything similar, or even if it's not similar, but they at least empathize with trauma or pain or losing your loved ones. Like if you know people that have gone through those things, I find it's a lot easier to reach out to some of those folks. And like you're saying, there's people that I would be very vulnerable with, and then there's others I would not because I don't know their story or I don't
Mhm.
um, resonate with it. And I feel like there's things we could do better as a society to support each other going through some of these things. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what could we be doing better? Like I agree, put down the phone, unplug. On the flip side of that, when I was getting divorced about 15 years ago, somewhere in there, I didn't have the energy to go socialize with people after work. Like I just didn't want to do that. But I found connections on different social media sites. I found connections playing a silly little games, and those were actually life-saving things at that time for me. Um, which might sound extremely dramatic, but when you're going through something really difficult, it's not dramatic. Like you need some kind of connection and support. So anyway, I'm just wondering what you think we could be doing better and different, especially for caregivers, for adult kids and parents at horde, of anyone dealing with, maybe you have a special needs kid, maybe you have um maybe you need support, maybe you're finding out diagnoses that you didn't know before. So what can we do better?
Well, this may sound weird, but first thing I would do is I would get Audible. It's $15 a month. There's millions of books you can get for Audible for 15 audio books for $15 a month. Start downloading podcasts, and I'm not just saying it because I'm a podcaster. The reason why I'm saying it is because the brain doesn't know if Tammy is sitting in front of me or when I'm walking in the morning, if her voice is in my ear, my brain doesn't know the difference.
Right.
So even if people think I'm feeling lonely, okay, I can't afford to hire Patrick Bet David for $1,000 an hour, but for $15 a month, I can get buy his book and he can be in my ear 24/7. So even that person, even if they're not in your physical space, your mind doesn't know the difference between being in a physical space or the mental space. So I would definitely start getting books on any kind of books um, on hoarding. I definitely download this. It's a weird podcast by some chick that was in the Navy called the Hoarding Solution. I'd probably download that. But I would try to go onto Facebook. Depends on what your age is, because now the Facebook is an older generation.
Mhm.
But there's so many groups like Veterans Supporting Veterans or the Vetpreneur Tribe. There's so many different groups for everything. So you don't have to be alone. Because, like I said, sometimes it's better to be on a Zoom call than to being in your living room crying, with a gun in your hand or with a bottle in your hand. And sometimes, like we met in Mick, DC.
Right?
And we've been friends since, but sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone and say, listen, maybe there's 5 people that are struggling with the same thing and they're having a meeting in my town.
Mhm.
Why don't I go? And it doesn't have to be a big, or it could be just a cup of coffee. But sometimes if you just find like you, Dudek, Curry, Lido, those are my 5. And sometimes you just need 5 people that will get you where you need to go. So if there's 5 people that have struggled through the same thing, but they've gone through it and they're excelling, guess who's going to be number 6?
Mhm.
Right. So that's what that's what I would do. I download Audible, I download whatever you listen to podcasts on, and I would try to find out whatever you're struggling with, because somebody's already been there, done it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And success leaves clues. So if somebody wants to start a business that's a veteran, you go to Vetpreneur Tribes. People have done it. People, there's groups for everything on every social media. You just have to, maybe go into Google and type in um, uh, bereavement groups. Like I just helped a young lady launch her podcast. It's called Grief to Grace.
Mm.
And it's about people that have lost loved ones and now they're finding grace after grief. So sometimes you just have to Google's your friend. And now Chat GPT is your friend, even better than Google. But that's all you have to really do is find a couple of things and get involved. Get involved. If you're not getting involved, it's your fault. Like my mother says, I'm so lonely. There's like 100 people there. She talks to nobody. I'm like, well, it's your fault. If you don't talk to these people and you're sitting in your room and you say you're lonely, it's your fault. And that's what I love about Grant Cardone and his wife. I love the book 10X. The only thing I got out of the whole book was, and I underlined it, where he said, after reading this book, everything in your life is your fault. Maybe not how it happens to you, but how you react to it. So, guys, if you're lonely, if you're broke, if you're busted, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, it's your fault. Nobody's coming to save us. Nobody is coming to save us, and it's all an inside job.
And
But if somebody's made it out, of it, what did they do to get out of it? Let me do that.
and like you said, success leaves clues, right? And I went to the 10X Ladies event last year. I was not able to go this year um, due to increase of issues with my mom. That's partly why I chose not to. But as far as monitoring things like that, but going to that, I really got out of my comfort zone. I had spent time in Florida in the past because that's where I went to boot camp, but this was very different, right? I was staying in a high-end hotel. I was participating in an event I hadn't been to before. I met a lot of different people there. Um, I just, I really got out of my comfort zone with that whole situation. And I would have liked to have met some of the guests, right? But I didn't pay at that level to be there. I paid at a lower level, so that didn't happen. But what it did show me was it's okay to show up afraid. It's okay to step out, step up, and just be vulnerable and talk about what you do and why you do it. And when people start understanding your why at some of these events, it's like you have an instant connection and they are very vulnerable with you when you're being vulnerable. And so I think it does come back to being willing to step out of your comfort zone, which is in essence a form of vulnerability. And so finding a podcast, I'm in a couple different groups for adult children of hoarders. I have my own group, the Hoarding Solution Community, because I'm more lax about, I want to see your pictures. I want to know your struggle. And yeah, it might be triggering, but you should know that because you're coming in the group. Like, so, but finding a place that works for you, connects with what you're going through. And also, like you're saying, if you've survived it, what did people do to get out of there? How did they manage growing up in that situation? How do they manage it now when they have to step back into it for whatever reason? I was astounded to learn how many people join the military to get away from some kind of BS. And I thought I was special and I was the only one that escaped a situation like hoarding, but I was wrong. Like lots of people were looking for a way out and something positive way out. And the military provided that. I'm not going to say the military doesn't have its issues, but I'd say every workspace does. Every situation does have other issues involved. But by and large, it was the best decision I could have made as a teenager to experience something new. And you don't necessarily have to go through that path, but, and I'll speak to this now, as there's natural breaking points in our lives, like you finish high school, you finish college, maybe your enlistment is up. Like there's these natural breaking points where you can make a decision to do something different, and it's okay to do that. And you may or may not have the support that you think you need, but as long as you're championing yourself, you're being your own champion, and you know that this is the right direction for you, then you have to do it. You have to go for it. You can't let all the other crabs in the bucket keep you in the bucket. You have to say, I'm getting out of this bucket, and I don't know what the rest of you are going to do, but I got to get out of here. And I feel like the only way to help others is to save ourselves, and then we can be helpful to them. And just as an example, I felt very guilty leaving my brother in the horde when I escaped at 18. He was in a wheelchair. He had high level of needs that had to be met, but I couldn't take him with me. But I knew if I could save myself at some point, maybe I could help him, which turned out to be true. But I had to save myself. I had to make decisions that would change the trajectory. And that's not always easy to do. It's not easy to look at your situation and say, I got to get out of here. And I saw lots of different routes that people took, but I feel like I chose the right one for me at that time. And I think you're right. No one's coming to get us. We got to figure it out.
One thing I wanted to mention is, a lot of us, when we start taking parents, taking care of our parents in their 70s and 80s, a lot of us, like me, I'm an OG, I'm an old guy. I'm 55 years old. But is my whole life all I do is take care of Rosemary? No. My life, I have more things that I want to do. I'm just not a caretaker. And I think sometimes when you caretake for people, you start taking that on as who you are. You're like, well, what do you do? Well, I take care of no, what do you do? Just because you're 50, 55 years old, you got another 35, 40 years. Are you just Rosemary's caretaker? Or why do you get up in the morning? If that's your only reason to get up, you might as well just join her in there. You might as well become roommates. You might as well just move in, because your life is over if you think my whole identity is being a caretaker. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think it's real easy to get pulled into that. Like, this is all I do. This is like every waking moment is managing their situation. And that's exhausting and irritating. And I'm learning not necessary. You've got to find a balance, which I don't even know if balance is the right word. You have to find a way to have some of your own life too. And if you don't do that, you become lost and mired in. And then if they happen to pass away, or when they do, who are you then? Like, you're not that in that same role now. So if you haven't cultivated something along the way, you're going to be lost without that person. Or I wouldn't even say the person, you're going to be lost without your role to that person. And I see a lot of people step immediately into another caregiving situation and another caregiving situation, but they haven't dealt with their grief. They haven't processed the loss. They're just continuing on this hamster wheel of what they know or what they're comfortable with. And so I personally don't have children for a number of reasons. And it never occurred to me in my 51 years of living that I would become basically a parent to my own parent. Like, that thought didn't really cross my mind until you're in a situation where you're like, no, we can't do that. That's dangerous. You need to you need to use the stoplight, or you need to use your walking stick or your cane, or you need to eat this food, like you need to get to this appointment. Like, you really step into this role, caregiving, parenting. um, I'm sure there's some other words that aren't polite that you could use, because sometimes you get that frustrated. You have to find something, and that's why it's great to have a podcast, a book, even if it's YouTube, like whatever it is that keeps you going. And some people will walk around with, an earbud in one ear and listening to whatever's over here with the other ear, because I experienced hours of, you want me dead, you this, you that, in an ER with someone. And it's like, how long do I have to sit here and listen to that, when even the doctor is like, what is this lady talking about? Like, your kid is sitting right here, lady. It's not like she left you here. It's not like, clearly she cares about you, but you're so mired in whatever's going on with you that you can't see it. You can't see the level of care that your kid is giving you right now. The level of respect and concern exceeds probably what you are deserving right now based on what's coming out of your mouth. And so that verbal assault really can get in your head, and you start to believe that what this one person is saying is accurate, when everybody else is the exact opposite. Like, they have the exact opposite opinion of who you are. And it can be really confusing when it's your parent who is being that aggressive to you. And all you're really doing is the best you can for them. And let's face it, you wouldn't be trying if you didn't care. Like, I wouldn't be trying all the things and being involved and looking out for you if I didn't care about you. And that is exhausting. That's totally exhausting to live like that 24/7. And if you're a person that has your loved one in your home with you, even there, you have to figure out what your limits and what your boundaries are, which, by the way, I don't think is the greatest idea. I think a facility or an apartment or something near you is far better, because you can still be autonomous people, and you want them to have their independence as long as they can, but you also want some of your own darn independence, and you want the ability to go on a cruise or a trip or whatever. And you've got to figure out what your limits are and your boundaries and what you will tolerate. So I agree that you have to have something for you, and you have to be available for your kids and your loved ones and other people. And you have to be available for you. You have to take a walk, work out, drink coffee while it's hot, make the cookies. Like, just being present for you. And I love what you said about your wife, about the fact that she will help you, but she has a limit on how involved she will be. And it's a similar boundary that I hold for my boyfriend, which is
Mhm.
I don't expect you to deal with this. I'm going to deal with this. But by the way, that means you've got to deal with this part because I'm not available or whatever. Like, so there, I think it's fine and acceptable that you have kind of a separation of duties, if you will, when it comes to some of these things. And there's no point in both of you getting verbally assaulted, right?
Yeah. And then it's hard because and I always tell my mother, or I tell anybody, I'm going to be brutally honest. I'm not going to, you know, bullshit. I'm not going to. And my mom was like, well, why doesn't she come? Because she doesn't like you. It's plain and simple. I'm not going to BS you. She doesn't like you because she knows how you treated me.
Right.
You can't, like my kids, I love my kids. They're pains in the asses, but I'll do anything for them. Like my mother's thing was, you made your bed, you're lying in it. And I was actually homeless a few times, living in the streets, eating out of garbage cans. And she said, well, you made your bed, you lie in it.
Mm.
And I got kids going to college now, and I'll do anything for my kids, because once you decide to have a kid, your life is not over, but you want your kids to have better than you had in your life. And once my wife sees the way I was treated, every time she sees my mother, she gets that anger. And I got a Sicilian wife. So once that anger gets up, it ain't coming down. So that's what I'm just like, you know, she don't like you, she's not coming to see you next. So next subject.
And, in a similar way, your mom made her bed, right? So now she's lying in it. And,
But
and that's,
the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing, and my wife, everybody around me says you're crazy, is because my dad on his dying deathbed said, "Yeah." I said, "Dad, what's your last wish?" He said, "Just take care of your mother." So I'm doing it to honor my dad more than out of anything else. So like anything I do, I just try. I live with that him holding my hand as he passed, saying, "Please take care of mom." And for me, that's what keeps me going. When days I don't want to go, I'm like, because now I have his car. He picked it up, and and all
Mhm.
that. When I look outside and I see Dad's car, I'm like, yeah, I guess I gotta go see her. I promised you I'd take care of her. So,
but
so
I'd like,
sometimes stuff like that, you know.
but I'd like to point out that you are taking care of her in a way that's healthier for you and your family. It did not mean you had to bring her into your home and disrupt your life, which we know if someone has a hoarding issue or dementia, that's what is going to happen. And so it is possible to honor your dad's wishes by this way. It's still honoring what you agreed to do. And I think more people need to understand that taking care of someone can mean a lot of different things. And I know that I've heard people say, well, I promised I'd never put him in a home or I'd never put him wherever. And you might make that promise in the moment, not knowing what's coming down the line later. And so I think you have to adjust what keeping that promise means sometimes. And it's okay. You, Sometimes I think we're seeking validation that we're doing the right thing. And I had a conversation recently with someone around the situation I'm dealing with my mom. And I met with him and his wife, and so we had a good conversation about that. But basically, it was sometimes you have to exercise tough love. And while I know that, I really needed someone to look me in the face and say it. And that just kind of gave me the courage to keep moving in a direction that might be slow, but at least I'm making headway on my side of things that I need to do. But I think often that's what we need, is someone to hear us out and remind us that what we're doing is fine, that we're okay, that this is the right decision given the situation. Maybe I read something lately that sometimes you have to make the right decision, even if it breaks your heart. And sometimes that's what you have to do. And I never
Well,
really,
unfortunately, breaking it down to the simple, um, like the great poet and singer Jim Morrison once said, nobody gets out of here alive.
right?
So you only have a certain amount of time that you have to enjoy your life, because one day it's going to be your turn. And if you're not enjoying the moments, my 55 years have gone by. So make sure you're enjoying the moments and enjoying your life, because one day, I love the song by Tim McGraw, "Live Like You Were Dying," because one
Mhm.
day you will.
Right.
So make sure that you're looking at the big picture, saying, okay, I got this one life. I have to enjoy it. I'm only getting one. So, enjoy, make, like, even some people, I know it's tough sounding, but I think the military taught us how to compartmentalize. We can compartmentalize stuff. Say, okay, mom is my job. That's a part of my job.
Mhm.
But also I want to enjoy life too. So you have to learn to start compartmentalizing, saying, okay, this is not who I am. This is what I do, but I have a whole other life around me. Don't let that one job crush your whole life.
Amen. And don't let it become solely who you are, because it can suck the life out of you.
Yep.
And you can't afford it if you've got other, well, you can't afford it, period. But if you have other people in your life who need you, you've got to kind of, and I'm getting better at it. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I I envision a little shoe box and I just put it in it and it goes up on the shelf. Okay, now new box, I got to deal with this. And some days all the boxes fall off the shelf, but most of the time you can find a way to move through the moments, I think. Um, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk about all these things, because I know it's not easy, but I also know there are tons of people in our age group that are dealing with this kind of situation. And it's hard to have conversations with people who are just not dealing with some of these difficult things, because they're they're not dealing with it. And I have a level of realness and authenticity that I just, hey, I want you to go with me and do this. Well, that's great. But guess what? We're going to talk about what's really going on at the doctor's office, or I am not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to be authentic. Now, whether they're going to do anything, a provider, with that information, that's a whole nother conversation. But at least you are being present and authentic and letting other people be aware of what's going on. And that comes right back to being vulnerable, which is kind of difficult some days. So I love that you're helping people start podcasts. You've got a great book about just methodically going through that and figuring it out. So yes, and I should have had it here to show. And I have it floating around here in I'm carrying around books to read, which I do. I actually read real books in addition to Audible and different things.
Yeah.
But so what's happening in your world? What's happening with Vertical Momentum Podcast? I know you've got some exciting things coming down the pike. And so tell us what's happening there.
Well, first of all, if it wasn't for that meeting in DC, that changed my life. Not only the meeting that we had at the diner where we
Mm-hmm.
sketched out your podcast on a napkin, but also the face to face meeting I had with Stephen Kuhn,
Mm-hmm.
where he set me straight. He said, "Rich, nobody knows who you are. You're the supplement guy, you're the podcast guy, but nobody knows who you really are. And that's when I think we both sat down and we're like, all right, we're going to make this podcast thing work. So it's 6 years now. I can't believe it. 5 or 6 now. So the podcast, I think we're up to almost 3 million downloads. We're on like 35 different platforms. And now I'm teaching people, you want to start a podcast? Okay. You buy the book at breakfast, you'll have a podcast by dinner. I wrote a book, it was 42 pages, no fluff, no BS. Do this, do this, do this, you'll have a podcast. And then if you want me to help you podcast, I also offer personal coaching where I take you through an 8-week class and teach you exactly how to do it, and also run Facebook ads for your podcast and all that stuff too. So that I got that going on. I'm going to be on 300 podcasts in the next year myself, and I'm going to record 300 podcasts with other people this year. A bunch of speaking gigs coming up. Vet Summit is coming up. Vet Summit 2024 is coming up. So a lot of great things are coming up. But unfortunately or fortunately, after my accident, I realized I only have today. I can only think about, give 100% today. I can't, I think about tomorrow, but I really don't think about it. And for me, it's the word focus, follow one course until successful. And for me, the focus is the podcast. And now the focus is veteran supporting veteran group. I'm starting a podcast for that. I started a YouTube channel for that. I started an Instagram channel for that. It's just for veterans to find a home again. So that's what I'm focused on, is just giving back, because, well, the average American male that lives 78 years. So that means I got 23 years if we really look at it. And I want to make as much impact as I can. So that's all I'm really working on, is the same thing I've been working on for the last 6 years. But because I've doing exactly what you says on your hat, I'm 10xing everything in the next 12 months. So instead of me having 3 million downloads, I want 30 million. Instead of making $60,000 in the next year, I want to make 600,000. So for me, I'm starting to think bigger, because it takes just as much energy to ask somebody for $100 than it does for $1 million. Same exact words, same amount of time, same amount of energy. So why do we think small instead of going big? And that's my focus for the next 12 months, is actually to 10x everything in my, that's including being 10 times the husband, 10 times the father, 10 times the friend. So if once you decide to 10x everything in your life gets exciting. And I'm going on 56 and I feel like I'm 40.
And it's funny, I feel younger now sometimes than I did in my 40s. And I think it has a lot to do with clarifying what we're focusing on, what impact do we want to leave behind. And that's where I find what legacy do I want to leave? I want something that's here long after I'm gone, that was helpful for people, that made a difference for them. It's not, and even realizing that you have a message and a mission that you could 10x is very valuable. And I've heard that the best self-improvement journey you could go on is to start a business. And I would say that's accurate, that's true. And you may fail forward, but you're still moving forward. And I think that's the key, is to keep moving forward, even if it's slow, even if it's muddy or gross or difficult or sweaty. Like, you still have to figure out what you're here for, what's your purpose. And once you do that, you can really make a difference. And I will say that I've been in Vet Tribe for a number of years. There's been a lot of transitions, but when I first found that group, that was a coming home moment for me. And I don't think I really embraced who I really was until, like, I could bring that military experience forward. I could bring that strength with me, and that was okay. And so it really did change things. And then, like you said, once I went to MIC DC, that was a life-changing experience. And I got to tell you, like, I saw Stephen Eugene Kuhn, like you mentioned, I saw him up on a thing and I waved and he waved, and I was like, wow, I actually like know this person, maybe virtually, but I got to meet him. I remember walking up to, like, they had the pre thing for MIC-DC, right? And we went to an event for Heroes Vodka. It was down the road, whatever. And now I'm name dropping all over the place, but interestingly enough, Travis McVeigh is someone I had met years before the Heroes Vodka came out. So several of us went down there to just check out the situation. And I walked up to Cortez Riggs and I was like, "Hi, I'm Tammy." And he's like the founder of MIC-DC, right? He's the creator and the mastermind behind all this. He shakes my hand and he goes, "Oh yeah, I know who you are." And I was like, "What?" Like, I'm not sure I knew who I was at that point, but it was validating to just be showing up. That's basically it. I didn't necessarily know about the podcast yet or any of those things, but in those moments you're like, oh, maybe what I'm doing does matter. Maybe something is resonating with someone along the way. And same with Rob Garcia. Like, I had talked to him, knew him, but getting to meet him and talk with him and see that energy that he brings was very valuable to me, to see that. And
See, like when I went, I couldn't stay the night because I had something to do. But my goal was just to go and hug everybody.
yep.
So I was hugging Annette. I hugged Annette
Yes,
Wittenberger,
Annette. It was so
Daniel
great to meet
Faust,
her.
Kurt Ballage, Cortez, Cortez. I was
Mm,
just hugging everybody. But once you put the face and you hug somebody or you shake their hand, and I actually got an email from somebody said, you know what, that was the first time that an adult man hugged me since I was a child.
oh wow.
Be- but it was amazing. And like I said, I'm a big vet tribe guy, even though I have my own group. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it doesn't take anything away from I'll always be a vet tribe member. That's my home.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys want to become a veteran entrepreneur, you need to join the vet tribe. If you want to just get support for other things besides business, join the veteran supporting veterans group. Like I said, I'm not taking anything for vet tribe because if Marshall would say, you know what, Rich, I want you to shut down that group today. I feel it's harming vet tribe. I would, because I was one of the original 500 members and I've grown up with the vet tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, if you know anybody who wants to be a veteran and a vetpreneur, make sure you check out Marshall Terran and also Robert Garcia at the Vet Tribe.
And I can put a link for Vet Tribe because it really did make a difference for me. And in the very beginning, now that I'm thinking about it, at one point they even interviewed Grant Cardone and that interview is probably somewhere in Vet Tribe, but still, I think. And it just, there's power in connection. And that's what I have found. And they say your net worth is your network.
Yeah.
And I am amazed by the people that I know who, if I called or messaged, they would respond. And that's a good feeling to know that, but it also means I have to return it. And I'm not always as on it as I should be. So that's something for me to work on, right? But there is something that I have gleaned from a lot of that, and that really is about the connections and being supportive. And even Trish Lido, like you mentioned, we kind of more jokingly, but we're both Navy vets, right? So there is this inherent connection there that you don't necessarily have with others. And so um, being a veteran is not simple a lot of times. Being in the military is not simple. But you can take what you've learned and you can apply it in so many ways. And I'd also say I'm always a work in progress, right? Like, I don't have it all figured out, but there are people who do. and I can tap into that knowledge, and even listening to different podcasts, or pulling up like, hey, this person interviewed this person, I wonder what they have to say. And that doesn't mean you necessarily agree. It's just you're in a place of learning and of seeing what's out there. And I think if you just, I have a friend that was my dad's friend when I was growing up, and he used to say, as long as you're alive, there's hope. And he has since passed away many years ago, but I think of that. Like, I'm still here, so there's hope. Even the days when I don't feel like it's like it is there. And I just think we have to remember our roots, but make solid connections too, and not be afraid to 10x things. And
And I also got to say, just one last thing is, if it wasn't for Robert Garcia, Travis Johnson, Joe Palacios, I would not have this. I would not be a podcaster if it wasn't for them. So, and it was all because of connections. And I've never met either of them live. It's always been on Zoom or through. So, like I said, it doesn't matter if you see them, if you know them personally, you could build relationships over social media.
Exactly. And I think if you can remember that it's a tool, money is a tool, social media is a tool, connections, like all those things are a tool to advance us if we use it right. And
yeah.
I'm not going to say I don't get lost in some silly game or do something off and on, but by and large, that's the only reason I'm there, is for the connections and the impact. And that makes a difference for people. And I encourage people to reach out to you if they're looking to start a podcast, or, you know, have a story that might resonate with your audience. You're a valuable person to know and connect with. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here and chat with me for a rather extended period of time. So how can
I'm so
people?
grateful. And like I said, oh, they can just Google Vertical Momentum podcast. We're on the first 8 pages of Google. So you just Google us. But I also wanted to give, if somebody's looking to start a podcast, just because they're your audience, they'll get a free hour of my time
Oh,
whenever they want, through either via Zoom, StreamYard, whatever. I'll help them get their idea together, and no strings attached. Just because they're a friend of yours, and any friend of Tammy's is a friend of mine. So I just wanted to offer that out to anybody that's out there.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's very valuable. And anybody who's interested, I encourage you to do that. And you will have a wide ranging conversation and walk away inspired. You will have things to think about and do. Um, so I thank you very much for being here today.
And like I said, if I could ever choose to have a sister in this life, you would be her. So you are the perfect sister, and I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. And you are the perfect brother. I'm happy to count you in my family.